This is a book you can live in. Hello everyone, and welcome to Dutch Greybeard. This is my reading vlog of Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. Before diving into the several updates I made along the 16 days I spent with this book, I want to say that this is going to be a spoiler-filled video. So if you have not read this book, please do not watch this video, unless you don't intend to read this book, of course, then it doesn't matter. But I will talk spoilers. So, spoiler alert. As you may hear from my voice, I have the flu. But I couldn't postpone this very first update of my read of Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. So if I should say some incoherent stuff, I apologize in advance. Other than Brian Lee Durfee, who has elevated the art of editing a video to a completely new level, I won't be editing out anything. So, apologies if I ramble and talk nonsense because of the flu. It's not my fault. All right, I'm at page 192 at the second of the first, at the second of the interludes. So let's start with my first update on my read of Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. I started this on September 18 and have had 5 reading sessions so far. I have come to page 380, like this. You can see the black side of the pages and the still pristine white side of the pages. These are to be read and these are read. Overall, I am loving it so far. It's not yet better than Way of Kings. It's equally entertaining and equally intriguing so far. I do have some quotes, of course, you know me. The first thing I want to quote to you is on page 29. Jasna and Shallan are on the boat, and Jasna says to Shallan, "Look down into the waters. What do you see?" Shallan stopped beside the rail and stared down at the blue waters, foaming as they were broken by the ship's prow. Here at the bow she could see a deepness to the swells, an unfathomable expanse that extended not just outward but downward. "I see eternity," Shallan said. I love that. That's beautiful. The Spren are at the center of this story so far. They are becoming more and more important to what's behind all of this, what's happening. "There's an entire world, Shallan," Jasna said, "of which our minds skim but the surface. A world of deep, profound thought. A world created by deep, profound thoughts. When you see Shadesmar, you enter those depths. What are Spren? They're living ideas? By my best guess, Spren are elements of the cognitive realm that have leaked into the physical world. They're concepts that have gained a fragment of sentience." Bit by bit, we get more information about the Spren, why they come to some people, why they bond with some people. But it's not enough yet. I really don't have any clue as to what they are or what they're supposed to be. "There's a secret you must learn, child," Jasna said. "Power is an illusion of perception. Some kinds of power are real. Power to command armies, power to soulcast. These come into play far less often than you would think. On an individual basis, in most interactions, this thing we call power, authority, exists only as it is perceived." That is so profound. That is true wisdom. I'm so curious about Shadesmar, this parallel world where Spren are residing, I think. I'm very curious about that world. We've only visited a couple of times now, with Shallan, of course, and in a flashback of Jasna. And it is intriguing, very intriguing. What is it? How does it work? What does it mean? Anyway, questions. Questions remain, which is good. I deeply admire the way Brandon Sanderson is spoon-feeding the reader little bits of information. He does that so good. You have to keep on turning the pages to find out the next bit of information so that you can form a whole picture. That's what you want as a reader. You get a million pieces of the puzzle and you want to put them all together to get the entire picture. He does that like no other author I've read so far. He doesn't make you swim in deep waters and not having any ground to stand on. You always have something to grab onto and to get you further into the story. You're never lost like I was with N.K. Jemisin in the Broken Earth trilogy or at the beginning of the Dragons stories by Anne McCaffrey. I applaud him for that. One of the scenes I absolutely love is when the former Bridge 4 members are becoming the guards of Dalinar and they get a new emblem on their uniforms. And they have to decide which kind of emblem that's going to be. And they don't want to use the Dalinar emblem because they say, we are Bridge 4. And there are some very beautiful scenes in that respect. It's about freedom. When are you free? One of the glyphs in their emblem means freedom. One of the bridge men nodded. That's good, but it's not enough. Add Bridge 4 to it. Freedom, Bridge 4. To imply you were freed from Bridge 4? No, sir, I wasn't freed from Bridge 4. I was freed by it. I wouldn't trade my time there for anything. That is so special. It occurs several times in the story that the former Bridge 4 members actually lived their best while being on Bridge 4, under Kaladin, of course, not before Kaladin. Later on, in that same vein, Kaladin says that it's the insignia of the Kholin Guard, Dalinar Kholin's personal bodyguard. They're dead, Gancho, Lopen said. We aren't them. Yeah, Scar agreed. He got out his knife and cut the patch free. We're Bridge 4. Bridge 4 was our prison, Kaladin protested. Doesn't matter, Scar said. We're Bridge 4. The others agreed, cutting off their patches, tossing them to the ground. Teft nodded and did likewise. We'll protect the Blackthorn, but we're not going to replace what he had before. We're our own crew. That is strong, that is powerful. I'm very curious about the Everstorm. What is that going to be? Is that going to be a desolation? We've seen something of the desolation in the visions Dalinar has or in some flashbacks. I'm just wondering, the Everstorm. One of those big, big questions. A little bit unlikely to me is the fact that King Elhokar almost slavely, obediently follows Dalinar. I find that in Way of Kings, this was more realistic. He pushed back more. And, I mean, nobody believes that the Knight's Radiance should be reinstated, which Dalinar has finally said out loud that he's going to do. It's a little bit unrealistic that nobody pushes back harder the way they did in the Way of Kings. Dalinar seems to be calling the shots. And I'm not quite certain why that is. He's not the king, and many of those high princes are not on his side. The king has very, very big doubts, and still he pushes forward without much resistance in that respect. I find that a little bit unrealistic, as I've said. The pace is picking up this last little bit, but before that, the first 250, 300 pages, the pace was not as fast as I had anticipated. But I've still got 900 more pages to go, so that's probably going to change. I love the dialogues between Pattern, the Spren, and Shallan. Their play on words about truth and lies is so interesting and beautiful.
Pattern hummed. Truth is individual. What? No, it's not. Truth is... it's truth, reality. Your truth is what you see, Pattern said.
The concept of truth versus lies is very important to this story. The title, Words of Radiance, refers to a book, as did The Way of Kings. I like that. I like that very much. I do want to learn more about the book within the book. It is lost in the shipwreck that Shallan intentionally caused. So I don't know if there is another copy somewhere, but I'd love to learn more about that book. Continuously in this book, there are reveals, minor and major reveals, which urge the reader to keep on turning the page for more. You want to have more reveals. You want to finish the puzzle. One of those reveals is about the Spren, those mysterious creatures. On page 146, Syl talks to Kaladin.
There are others like you, Syl whispered. I do not know them, but I know that other Spren are trying, in their own way, to reclaim what was lost. I am the only honest Spren who has come. I was forbidden. I came anyway, to find you.
This has so much implications about the background that we do not know yet. Up until now, page 380, I've been waiting for Seth to show up. The assassin with the shard blade and the magic system at his hand. When we left The Way of Kings, he got a new assignment by a mysterious person to assassinate Dalinar. And so far, he hasn't shown up yet. The numbers written on the walls in Dalinar's rooms, I think they are made by Seth, implicating you've got so many days left to live. And those are the days that Kaladin has to use to improve his skills with Stormlight. He has been practicing with that with his men, but I don't think he's mastering it very well at the moment. Not as well as Seth does. Looking very much forward to their clash. The clash between Kaladin and Seth. That must be something. I love the interludes. I've only read one interlude section yet. There were 4 interludes. 2 of those were from the perspective of the Pashendi. I really was looking forward to that. It's a bit slow, but it's another new world. They speak in songs, they speak in melodies, and they live in what they call a form, the war form, the doll form, the art form. No, the art form is not, I'm not even sure. They use 5 forms at the moment, if I'm not mistaken, or 6, and they're looking for more. They're trying to disclose the storm form. That's going to be next, probably. I really love those. Especially, I loved the interlude of Im, the shoemaker. That's just beautiful. A beautiful chapter, which was really a highlight for me. His philosophy, by the way, is almost wordly the same as... look what's happening right here. There's a butterfly visiting me. He just flew in. Oh, my dear fellow, you have to go out. You don't belong here, no. I've got to save a butterfly first. I'm sorry if I sound a bit dull or not particularly overwhelmed by this book, but I blame that on the flu. I'm not feeling 100%, but I didn't want to wait any longer with this update. So I am very enthusiastic about this book, just so you know. The interlude with Im, the shoemaker, is definitely one of the highlights in this book for me so far. His philosophy is almost to the word exactly the same as in Neil Donald Walsh's books of the Conversations with God. I love the way Im invites the urchin, the stray boy who is without shoes and has a wound on one of his feet. He invites him in and says, well, I can make you shoes. The boy hardly can believe that he doesn't have to pay anything for it. No, Im says, the only thing I want from you is your story. I love that. I love that.
You're really going to give me a pair of shoes? The urchin said. For nothing? Nothing but your story, Im said. Why? Because, Im said, you and I are one. One what? One being, Im said. Long ago there was only one. One knew everything but had experienced nothing. And so one became many, us, people. The one who is both male and female did so to experience things. So you and me, the urchin said, are the same? Yes, two minds of a single being experiencing different lives.
I love that philosophy, and I feel somehow that that's the right philosophy. Don't ask me why I feel that, how I can feel that. I read it first in Neil Donald Walsh, as mentioned. It was a form of recognition that you don't experience very often in life. And I read that again here. It's beautiful. It's beautiful, and I love it. Related to this quote is another point about Syl, the Spren, Kaladin's Spren. She says at one point,
I am a god, Syl had said, a little piece of one.
That relates to this philosophy that we are all one, originating from a god or being that god, being part of that god. I find that a fascinating philosophy. And I'm glad I find it here in this beautiful book. I do find, I mentioned earlier, it's not as fast-paced as I had anticipated. And there are even many moments when the story hardly progresses, I find. It is as if Sanderson only needed those pages to continue his revelations about what is really going on. He has to have a stage to be able to make his small revelations in order for the reader to keep turning the page. But the story itself at those pages hardly progresses, which is fine. I mean, there's a lot going on. There's very much going on, and you have to keep track of everything. This, what I'm telling you now, is no criticism. It may even be an admiration for Brandon Sanderson for not making it 1,000 pages of extremely fast-paced action, but slowing it down at times and then moving the pace up again and then slowing it down. That's another big, big achievement of this author. It's the same as with spoon-feeding the reader with elemental parts of information, which he does so very well. The flashbacks of Shallan, I believe there are 2 so far, finally give us some information of her background and who her father really was. Not a very nice person, I'm guessing. Another thing that I find a little bit illogical so far is the fact that after Amaram has arrived at Dalinar's, he has not been confronted with Kaladin. I mean, Kaladin's name is all over the place because of who he is and what he does. And somehow Amaram has not heard of him yet, or has been avoiding him, or I don't know what's going on there. It's a little bit illogical that these adversaries have not been confronted yet. I mean, Amaram must know Kaladin exists, that he has survived. About the assassination attempt on King Elhokar, I don't know exactly why, but I think Adolin is involved in this. Perhaps it's the way he behaves towards Kaladin, calling him Bridge Boy and such. I don't know. I'm most probably wrong again. I'm never very accurate in predicting things in books like this, but I think Adolin is involved. We'll see. So far, I like the Shallan storyline a little bit less than the storyline in Way of Kings. What I liked about that storyline in the first book was the apprentice versus master storyline. I love that trope obviously. And now that Jasnah has perished, that trope is spent. It's done with. Shallan is the master. And so far, after the shipwreck, it's only been about her trying to travel to the Shattered Plains and having her adventures along the way. But they are pages, like I said earlier, they are the pages that Sanderson needs to deliver his revelations. And the story itself hardly progresses. They're important, they're absolutely important, but they're slow. Finally, odium is mentioned. I cannot wait to learn what it, he, or she is. It is important, that's for sure. I love that the dialogue between Syl and Kaladin gets more banter-like. It's very funny to read at times, like this one.
She lounged back, grinning, then frowned at his expression. "You're not enjoying yourself," Syl said. "You're starting to sound a lot like my mother." "Captivating," Syl said. "Amazing, witty, meaningful." "Repetitive." "Captivating," Syl said. "Amazing, witty, meaningful." "Very funny," says the man, not laughing, she replied, folding her arms. "All right, so what is drarifying you today?" "Drarifying?" Kaladin frowned. "Is that a word? You don't know?" He shook his head. "Yes," Syl said solemnly. "Yes, it absolutely is."
This is very funny. I like that. All right. Those were the things that I wrote down in the margins and that I wanted to share with you. So far, this is a great read. But it's not particularly better than Way of Kings. Still, I have more than 900 pages to go. We'll see what happens in the next update. Today is September 30, and it is high time to give you an update on my reading experience of Words of Radiance. I have a feeling that I don't have very much to say about the book. It's a bit strange perhaps, but I'm enjoying it immensely. It's great. It's a great read, but what to say about it, really? I am momentarily at page 895, so I've been doing quite some reading these past few days. It's such an easy book to pick up. The pick-up ability, I've mentioned this before, pick-up ability of this book is 95%. It's so easy to start a new chapter, and I'm enjoying it. I did my first update when I was at page 379. I have about more than 500 pages to cover. Sadeas, he is all politics. I love the character, even though he is mean and vicious and devious, that's the word. And he clearly cannot think outside of his own desires. Sadeas is not in the least interested in honor. Adeline agrees to have a duel with one of his opponents and says, "Bring along whoever you want," meaning one other. But he didn't specify the number. So when he enters the arena for his duel, 4 other shard-bearers appear before him. We'll get back to that in a minute. This is the Book of Shallan. Way of Kings was the Book of Kaladin. This is definitely the Book of Shallan. Her character develops in such a beautiful way. She's becoming more diverse and skilled with each page. It's really impressive. And I'm very interested in reading the flashback chapters. Oh yes, the scene where Tin, she's a con artist, and she believes Shallan is learning to be a con artist as well. I'm not quite sure why she believes that. It's obvious that the author needed it for Shallan to remain unknown to Tin because, as it appears later on, she was involved in the assassination of Jasnah. But the scene when they are reading the letter dictated through the span read of the people on the other side, the associates of Tin, they come up with information about House Davar, the house of Shallan, of course. And this moment is so good.
The span read was still writing. Some interesting news. You asked after House Davar in Jarkeved. It looks like Jasna, before leaving Carbranth, took a new ward. Shallan reached for the span reed. Tin caught her hand, the woman's eyes widening as the reed wrote a few last sentences. A girl named Shallan. Red hair, pale skin. Nobody knows much about her. Didn't seem important news to our informants until I pried. Shallan looked up just as Tin did, meeting the woman's eyes. Ah, damnation, Tin said.
They understand all of a sudden who they are. And this is one of the most revealing chapters where Shallan counts 10 heartbeats and pulls out a shard blade all of a sudden and kills Tin. In defense, of course, because if she wouldn't have done that, Tin would have killed her. And then I realized that I had earlier on stumbled upon these 10 heartbeats in Shallan's case. And that's in page 64. Jasna is still alive, of course, and they have a conversation.
So you're saying that what we can do was once the definition of what initiated one into the Knights Radiant, Jasna said. But we're women. Yes, Jasna said lightly. Spren don't suffer from human society's prejudices. Refreshing, wouldn't you say? Shallan looked up from poking at the pattern Spren. There were women among the Knights Radiant. A statistically appropriate number, Jasna said. But don't fear that you will soon find yourself swinging a sword, child. A memory rose unbidden. A silvery sword. A pattern of light. Truths she couldn't face. She banished them, squeezing her eyes shut. 10 heartbeats.
At that point, I couldn't understand what was being said, really. I underlined it because it seemed significant. Turns out Shallan is a shard bearer. Also, her brother, what's his name? Helaran or Helaran, used to be a shard bearer as well. So that means that House Davar used to have 2 shard bearers. What does that mean? So Kaladin has killed Helaran, Shallan's brother. Only Shallan doesn't know that yet, which will probably make a beautiful scene as well in the future. There is something that happens during battles with a shard blade. The way I think I've seen it is that Dalinar does this first. He puts his palms together and catches the shard blade when he's being attacked by it. So, like this.
The assassin swung his terrible blade down in a final overhead sweep. Dalinar did not dodge. Instead, he caught the blade. Dalinar brought the heels of his palms together as the blade fell, and he caught it just before it hit.
There's a second time when this happens, the moment that Kaladin tries to save Adolin when he is having this rigged duel.
Relis spun around and swung at him instead. Kaladin skidded to his knees in the sand, momentum carrying him forward a short distance as the blade fell. He raised his hands and snapped them together, catching the blade.
I don't understand how that works. That sounds like magic. It is mentioned once again when the Swordmaster Zahel is in conversation with Kaladin.
Kaladin jogged up to him. I saw Dalinar Kholin, while unarmed and unarmoured, catch a shard blade in mid-air with the flats of his palms. Zahel grunted. Old Dalinar pulled of a last clab, eh? Good for him. Can you teach me? It's a stupid manoeuvre, Zahel said.
I'm so curious as to how Seth is going to respond to the fact that he has met Kaladin. And he knows that Kaladin is also it's not a Knight Radiant, or I don't know all these words, a Windrunner, that's one of the words that's being mentioned. This is for Seth a very new insight. He is being called Truthless. I believe that's about to change because the existence of Kaladin, another with the abilities that Seth himself has, will probably make him not truthless anymore. So he may not be a slave to his Oathstone anymore. I don't know. I'm curious. I love the way, by the way, Kaladin is training himself to learn working with Stormlight and how he finds out how the lashing works. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. I like that. Really like that. When Kaladin knocks on Zahel's door in the middle of the night, or it's early morning, I don't know.
Kaladin, the bridge man turned bodyguard. The one with that spren Zahel could sense always spinning about. You look like death itself, Zahel snapped at the boy. What happened? Attempt on the king's life, the boy said softly. Is your offer to learn how to fight a shardblade still good? No. Zahel slammed the door. The boy pushed the door open. Please, the boy said. Kid, Zahel said. 2 people live in this room. The boy frowned, looking at the single cot. The first, Zahel said, is a grouchy swordsman who has a soft spot for kids who are in over their head. The other is a very, very grouchy swordsman who finds everything and everyone utterly contemptible. He comes out when some fool wakes him at a horrid hour of the night. I suggest you ask the first man and not the second, all right?
I really like that. That's funny. I love the scene where Shallan talks her way into the service of, what's his name, Sebarial, High Prince Sebarial. It's just a priceless scene where she's not only witty, she is very fast of mind. By the way, the assassination attempts on King Elhokar, I mentioned in my first update that I was suspicious of Adolin. I was wrong. It turns out that Moash is behind the assassination attempts. Well, so much for my theory. Yes, and it's reveal upon reveal. I love how Wit is, or Hoyt, whatever you want to call him, is playing his part in this story again. It's so beautiful. There's one thing, the first time that Wit has turned up again, he miraculously is driving the carriage somehow. It seems like Wit knows everything.
So you're just here, Kaladin said, to mock me. Well, it's kind of what I do, but I'll go easy on you. I wouldn't want you to go flying off on me. Kaladin jolted with a start. You know, Wit said nonchalant, flying off in an angry tirade, that kind of thing. Kaladin narrowed his eyes at the tall, light-eyed man. What do you know? Almost everything. That almost part can be a real kick in the teeth sometimes.
This is the author talking. Very nice. Bit of critique that I have. I've mentioned it earlier that I find it very unlikely that High Prince, he's not a High Prince, I think, General Amaram or whatever his function is, I find it highly unlikely that Amaram has not yet met Kaladin. That's strange because the whole campsite is talking about Kaladin. He is obviously a person who draws attention to himself. He's guarding Dalinar, and Dalinar has lots of conversations with Amaram. So it's highly unlikely that these two sworn enemies have not yet met, or don't even, at least Amaram doesn't even know about Kaladin's existence. And then on page 807, of course, inevitably they meet. It is straight after the moment that he claimed his boon with King Elhokar, a boon that the king said he didn't even give to Kaladin. Anyway, he claims, of course, to have revenge upon Amaram. And at that moment, the two finally lock eyes, and Amaram sees him for the first time, apparently.
Amaram stood up, then stumbled back. He hadn't recognized Kaladin until just then.
I find that a little bit lazy, to be honest. It's illogical, it's not very believable. It's not a big deal as well, but I thought I'd mention it anyway. Not everything is perfect. I love the story of Lift in one of the interludes. Beautiful, beautiful story. Really beautiful story. It shows that Sanderson is a master in telling stories. Doesn't matter how long the stories is, if they're 1,300 pages or 30 pages. he manages to pull it off every time. I love the story of Lift really well. Another thing I really love, I mean, Kaladin is in jail, he's in prison. All of a sudden, Hoyt, or Wit, he's being called. Wit sits outside his prison with I think it's a guitar, it's an instrument with taut strings, that's what it says. And he starts playing and says to Kaladin, tell me your story. That's a beautiful scene. Almost 95% of the story is being told by Hoyt, but Kaladin fills in the blanks somehow. It's beautiful, beautiful scene. So that's where I'm at this moment. I'm at page almost 900, 400 more pages to go. I believe that they will be going very fast. And I must say, up until now, I love it. It's a very good book. It's not particularly better than Way of Kings so far. There's so much happening and so many reveals, small ones, big ones, but somehow it's just moving along in a good way, but it's not blowing my mind at the moment. Not really. I'm enjoying the scenes, I'm enjoying the character developments, I'm enjoying the development of the story, even though I'm still left with many, many questions, which is all right. But, there's a but. A small but there's a but. We'll see if the final 400 pages bring any change in that. See you on the next update. Today is October 5, and yesterday I finished reading Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. And this is my final update. There is so much to say about this book and its writer. It's truly a work of art. Whatever you think of art or whatever you think of prose or literature, this is a work of art. Period. I'm going to talk about the pages from 895 until the end. It's beautiful how the relationship between Kaladin and Adolin is progressing. They started off a little bit animos when Adolin called Kaladin Bridge Boy. It was definitely meant to be insulting. And as the story progresses, Bridge Boy becomes more like a pet name and not insulting in the least. It's beautiful the way their relationship changes into a real friendship, really. I like that very much. Also, I got a different perspective on Kaladin than I had in the first book, The Way of Kings. In this book, Kaladin, of course, is the hero, the apprentice. The Way of Kings focuses on Kaladin, and The Words of Radiance focuses on Shallan. Especially that sequence where Shallan and Kaladin are stuck in the chasms, down in the chasms. That sequence gave me a different perspective on not just that sequence, but the whole book, of course. But that sequence in particular gave me a different perspective on Kaladin. He so tightly holds on to his hatred for Light Eyes. It's almost like it's an excuse for something he is covering up. Some element within himself that he doesn't want to know about. And especially when, in the end, when he becomes the true Knight Radiant, his eyes become light. He becomes a Light Eyes himself. So it's very interesting to see where that's going. Not that I don't like Kaladin anymore. He's definitely a very interesting character, to say the least. But he is not without faults anymore. Not that he was, but, well, you know what I mean. There's something dubious about him. Oh yes, I already mentioned the sequence where Kaladin and Shallan are locked up in a way in the chasms. I like the way the author changes POVs within the chapter. At one point we're experiencing their adventures from the point of view of Kaladin, and the next moment from Shallan. And that's very funny to see the differences there. Very, very expertly done by the writer. During a conversation between Dalinar and Navani, Dalinar uses a quote from The Way of Kings, the book within the book of The Way of Kings. And it's a beautiful quote. I would like to repeat it here. As I fear not a child with a weapon he cannot lift, I will never fear the mind of a man who doesn't think. That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. Every conversation with Wit, who is Hoyt, is a highlight for me in this book, like it was in The Way of Kings. In this maze of mysteries and untold lore, Hoyt, or Wit, very slowly and hesitantly lights the way for the reader. That's why those sequences are highlights. The so-called Sanderlanche sort of begins when Kaladin and Shallan fall into the chasm. About that Sanderlanche, I do not experience it as overwhelming as many other booktubers apparently did or do. That's one of the things. The expectations about this book, the anticipation, is fed largely because of the enthusiasm of other booktubers. And somehow it doesn't live up to it. I'm not saying that it's a bad book, on the contrary. But the completely overwhelming Sanderlanche, I do not experience that. Of course, there is a grand finale at the end and things come together. But, I mean, it's not very different than several other fantasy books. Like the one that comes to mind instantly is Darkness at Sethanon, the final book in the Rift Wars saga by Raymond T. Feist, talking about a grand finale. I mean, wow, that's a big one and a very, very good one as well. Nothing less, that's what I want to say really, nothing less than how Sanderson wraps up this huge story in this book and in that book, The Way of Kings. Nothing but praise, but the completely being swept off my feet is not as big as anticipated. Yes, what I absolutely loved in this book is how the memory of Chen, Kaladin's younger brother, brings him back to the words that he needs to say in order for Syl, his spren, to come alive again. The oath he has to take as a Knight Radiant is somehow prompted by the memory of Chen, his younger brother. I love that. It's so beautiful. It explains how important Chen was for Kaladin. I love the part where Kaladin and Shallan are trying to look on the bright side of life when they're in the chasms and saying like, I'm glad to be down here because, and then something follows, something insane. And she says to him, you're not very good at this. No, he's not. She says at a point,
I am glad to be down here because I've always wondered what it's like to be a chunk of meat traveling through a digestive system, and these chasms remind me of the intestines. I hope you're not serious. What? She looked shocked. Of course I'm not. Ew.
And that's when something they've talked about earlier reoccurs. She is trying to be witty all the time, using words as knives in a way. And Kaladin says,
you really do try too hard. It's what keeps me insane.
You would have expected her to say, it's what keeps me sane. But right because she's saying the opposite, makes this so pungent and so meaningful. There are very funny moments in this book. It's right before the Everstorm hits, or is it the High Storm? Well, either way, one of the storms is about to hit them while they're in the chasms, and they're trying to make a shelter with Shallan's Shardblade. And Kaladin calls up to her, saying, you're doing great! Keep at it!
When did you get so peppy? She shouted. Ever since I assumed I was dead, then I suddenly wasn't. Then remind me to try to kill you once in a while, she snapped. If I succeed, it will make me feel better. And if I fail, it will make you feel better. Everyone wins.
That's funny. I thought it was funny. The background and the meaning or function or being of Spren becomes more clear in this book, finally, because from the beginning I was wondering, what are they? Why are they in the story? Well, that becomes a little bit more obvious in this book. Everything Spren's like Pattern and Syl say reminds me of Im's philosophy. I've talked about that in an earlier update. Im was the shoemaker in one of the interludes. Like here on page 1069.
You were a mindless spren, Shallan said, like the ones that gather around me when I draw. Less than that, Pattern said. I was everything, in everything. I cannot explain it. Language is insufficient. I would need numbers.
It reminds me of the philosophy of Im about being one with all, being a part of all. Just divided, seemingly divided at this moment, but one drop in an ocean, but part of the ocean or the ocean itself, if that makes sense. Like later on, they are talking about, well, another what is called recreance, a desolation.
No wonder you're certain I will kill you. It is inevitable, Pattern said. You will eventually betray your oaths, breaking my mind, leaving me dead.
The Spren, yeah. There is so much to say about them.
There is something more you must do. Words, Shallan said. You have said the words, Pattern said. You said them long ago. No, it's not words that you lack. It is truth. You prefer lies. Yes, and you are a lie, a powerful one. However, what you do is not just lie. It is truth and lie mixed. You must understand both.
I find that a very significant quote, because at 2 times in this book, maybe more, but I just remember 2, Shallan is not being recognized as Shallan. She's being recognized as the person she impersonates. Like with Tin, she was supposed to be a con artist pretending to be Shallan. And at the very end with Moraine, if that's how you pronounce him, one of the Ghost Blood, he says that she is Vale and not Shallan at all. So these two, that there is so much more to Shallan than we have come to find out up until this point. And I'm very, very curious. I mean, the very big reveal that she killed her mother as well. What is that? Her mother tried to kill her, she says, when she found out what Shallan is, what she could do. There is so much more to Shallan. In that respect, I cannot wait to continue with reading. One of the interludes with Taravangian, King Taravangian, or however you want to pronounce his name, is very, very clarifying as well for the story. And at the same time, it presents us with even more questions. This is what Sanderson is a master in, giving the reader the impression that things are explained and at the same time present him with more questions than he already had. There's this funny scene between Shallan and Adolin when they're on horseback and Shallan has been given a very slow horse.
You purposely gave me a slow one, Shallan complained, didn't you? Sure did. I'd smack you if I could reach you up there. I want to ride in a majestic charge as we begin our expedition. And you can do so. Slowly. Technically, slow speeds can be very majestic. Technically, she said, a man doesn't need all of his toes. Shall we remove a few of yours to prove it?
9 out of 10 times, the quips of Shallan are really very good. The scene where Shallan reveals herself as a Lightweaver to Dalinar is very impressive. I really love that scene. It's so impactful, almost realistic, I would say. You believe it. You believe it strongly. The final 150 pages or something like that are a complete roller coaster ride. Really, really, you cannot stop reading anymore. It's the same as in The Way of Kings. The final 200 pages are absolutely fast-paced. I've talked about the Sanderlanche already, and the funny thing is that in the end there were not very many surprises story-wise. I already knew well ahead of time that Caladan would save King Elhokar, and that he would be saying the required words to become a Knight Radiant, and he would bring Syl back to life. I knew well in advance that when Dalinar was being attacked again by Seth, I knew that Kaladin would be there to save him, even though he was a long distance away. And I knew that Kaladin would be fighting Seth and win the fight. And still, it didn't diminish my reading pleasure one bit. Understanding where the story is going and more or less knowing what's going to happen, perhaps that is one of the reasons why the Sanderlanche didn't overwhelm me as big as it may have otherwise. But this is story-wise about the background of everything regarding Spren, for instance, and their role. There were many surprises, like the Honor Blade and the fact that Syl and Pattern are the blade, but then living blades. I mean, the Shard Blades are blades that need 10 heartbeats to come alive again. They're not dead in a way. They're in a slumber. Perhaps that's the better word for it. But the Spren that are in a slumber and are rudely awakened from that slumber by the 10 heartbeats, they scream. That's what the screams are all about. You were wondering in the beginning, what are the screams? What is that? And then you find out. I'm in awe. Still, I'm in awe of this writer. One of my favorite characters is Zahel, the Swordmaster. He is some sort of wise kung fu master, but he is funny also. He's one of my favorite characters. He's a side character perhaps, but I like him very much. We find that at the end, the author is laying the groundworks for the next book, meaning adding more questions to the already huge pile of questions we have. It's when Dalinar is speaking to what he thinks is the Almighty. He responds to the name Stormfather. At the least, he is the father of the Spren, because at some point when Syl is about to return to Kaladin, he's talking to Dalinar at that moment. Sorry, I have to leave because one of my daughters is being disobedient. So he is the father of the Spren, and they're all connected to this. Stormlight is the driving force of the world, perhaps. The energy that makes the world turn or gives life. I don't know yet. The dialogue between Dalinar and, let's call him Stormfather.
"Who are you?" Dalinar hissed. "I am the one left behind," the voice said.
At that point I thought he's one of the heralds from the prologue in The Way of Kings. But when asked if he is a herald, he says, "No, I'm not." So there you go. And the voice is, by the way, the voice is different than the voice he has heard in his visions. That was the Almighty. That was sort of a pre-recorded video of the Almighty talking to whoever would listen to his story. Then the Stormfather says,
"I am the sliver of him that remains. I saw his corpse, saw him die when Odium murdered him, and I fled, to continue as I always have, the peace of God left in this world, the winds that man must feel."
This is, you can almost grasp it, like, oh, that's it. No, I'm not. Yeah, no. That's how this feels, you know. That's what the author does so perfectly, to give you the idea that you understand, but actually you don't. Dalinar again asks him,
"Are you the Almighty?" "I said I am not, child of honor." "Then what are you?" "I am that which brings light and darkness." The voice took on more of a rumbling, distant quality. "The Stormfather," Dalinar said. "Are you a herald?" "No." "Then you are a Spren or a god?" "Both." So the Stormfather is a Spren and a god. He's the father of all Spren.
I loved the scene when they enter the tower at the Oath Gate. It's like an Indiana Jones reveal moment, but then much bigger, blown up to disproportionate size. It's so beautiful, so beautiful. You almost wish you could have been among the army there, entering that tower, looking at the mosaics and the majesty of it all. Beautiful, beautiful. Finally, Kaladin says the words. Where Kaladin says the words, the oaths, those kind of scenes, that is what fantasy is all about to me. This is one of the most impressive moments when Seth is attacking them again. They are no match for Seth. This is before Kaladin shows up. They are no match for Seth.
Dalinar's ribs cracked. He grunted, stumbling, almost falling. He swung his blade towards Seth, warding the man back, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. He sank to his knees, barely able to remain upright for the pain. In that instant, he knew a truth he should always have known. If I'd been there on that night, awake instead of drunken asleep, Gavilar would still have died. I couldn't have beaten this creature. I can't do it now, and I couldn't have done it then. I couldn't have saved him. It brought peace, and Dalinar finally set down that boulder, the one he'd been carrying for over 6 years.
Apart from the profoundness and the emotion behind everything, setting down that boulder. Just beautiful, just beautiful. One thing I don't understand, I haven't looked it up, but I'll just mention it. The shards that Kaladin and Shallan use, they are both Knights Radiant, at least at this point we think they are, and their shards are formed by their spren. And their shards can take any shape: a knife, a blade, a spear, a hammer, an axe, anything. And they can change any moment. And they don't have to be summoned by 10 heartbeats. As I mentioned earlier, the shard blades of the slumbering spren need to be summoned through 10 heartbeats. But earlier on in this book, it is suggested, let's put it that way, that also Shallan, like here, I've mentioned this one before, page 64, 10 heartbeats. That's what is mentioned. And then later on, when she first openly summons her shard blade, I believe 10 heartbeats are mentioned again. So it is suggested that her shard blade needs to be summoned through 10 heartbeats as well, which is not the case, because all this time Patton has been her shard blade. One of the other things I don't know is how long Patton is with her already. It would seem that Patton was with her a long time ago already. I first believed that he came to her, I believe, when they were on the boat or just before that, but it seems that he was there when she killed her mother. The 10 heartbeats thing is a bit confusing in the case of Shallan. Let's put it that way. Everything in this book so far fits perfectly. Sanderson is a watchmaker in telling stories. Every cog fits the other and brings alive a mechanism that is just truly amazing. I really am a big admirer of his craft. One of the things Syl says is funny and profound at the same time.
So, they're all spren, he said. Shard blades. Syl grew solemn. Dead spren, Kaladin added. Dead, Syl agreed. Then they live again a little when someone summons them, sinking a heartbeat to the essence.
That's beautiful prose.
How can something be a little alive? We're spren, Syl said. We're forces. You can't kill us completely, just sort of. That's perfectly clear. It's perfectly clear to us, Syl said. You're the strange ones. Break a rock and it's still there. Break a spren and she is still there, sort of. Break a person, and something leaves. Something changes. What's left is just meat. You're weird.
That's nice. That's very nice. Almost there. Almost there. Very surprising. Almost at the end. Seth is being brought to life at the end. He was defeated by Kaladin, but he's brought to life by Nin or Nalan or Nail, Herald of Justice. He brings Seth back to life, and he gives Seth another sword.
He had not seen a sword with a metal sheath before. And who sheathed the shard blade? And the blade itself? Was it black? An inch or so of it had emerged from the sheath as it slid on the rocks. Seth swore he could see a small trail of black smoke coming off the metal, like stormlight, only dark. "Hello," a cheerful voice said in his mind. "Would you like to destroy some evil today?"
Instantly I thought, I've heard that before. I've read that before. Where was it? Trying to search the attics in my memory, I finally found it again. It's Warbreaker. It's Nightblood. Nightblood was the sword Vasher used. Well, perhaps you could say it was the other way around. Nightblood was one of the characters, a very peculiar characters. This is, I believe, really the first real instance where, besides just mentioning the Cosmere, two different story parts are connected. Nightblood from Warbreaker. We're going to see him more, I presume. Then I was expecting to find Wit at the end. Wit is like the author at that point. He, at that point, is the god of all gods within the story, talking to us, the reader. It's very good. Right, I can put this one down. Words of Radiance is a great, great book, which I enjoyed immensely. It is fantasy at its best. Perhaps because of Booktube and the many enthusiastic videos I've seen about this book, particularly this book in the Stormlight Archive, my anticipation was just a bit too high to be able to rate this as 100 points out of 100, which may have been the case if I had stepped into it completely blind. To me, Words of Radiance is equally superb as Way of Kings. It's a different book altogether. It's, of course, in the same world and the same characters, but the storyline is different, but the build-up is more or less similar towards the end, the grand finale at the end, which also is the case in The Way of Kings. I find these two books equally good. I rated The Way of Kings 97 points out of 100, which is just a very solid 5 stars. And I'm going to give Words of Radiance also 97 points out of 100. I may take a small break from the Stormlight Archive at this point. One of the things I definitely want to avoid is fatigue, Stormlight Archive fatigue. I believe these books deserve my complete and undivided attention, and I'm not helping myself if I push on too fast. I don't know. Maybe I'll pick up Oathbringer tomorrow. I don't know. I'll just follow my feeling in that respect. But at this moment, I believe I want to read a few different other books. Just get away from the Stormlight Archive for a small period of time and then get back to it. That may mean that I won't be finished with the next 2 books in this series. At the moment, the 5th book, Wind and Truth, is being published. It's not that big of a deal. I mean, I'm going to read on. Once you've started this series, you cannot stop. So, of course, I will read the Stormlight Archive. But I just may not be reading Wind and Truth the exact moment it hits the streets. There is much more I would like to say about Words of Radiance, I believe that this is the essence of my reading experience. Thank you very much for watching this video. Until we meet again at Dutch Graveyard.